Nick says that this is the perfect way to prepare for the playoffs and the postseason. Mike McCarthy said something very similar in the locker room. Good morning, Nick. Why do you believe that?
Well, I just thought that's the type of games that you typically see in the playoffs. I'm not trying to suggest that Seattle is one of the top teams you got to go through or anything like that. But I think a crowd like that, a physical game that these two teams are playing, just knocking each other out. I mean, it was a really, really physical game. And sometimes I think in the playoffs or these clutch games, something weird's going to happen where you have to adapt. You have to figure out how do we come back from this? And I just thought it was one of those ebbs and flows games. It was really, really a great game. And it was probably one of the more enjoyable football games that I've seen and been to in a long, long time.
So you feel a little bit better about the Cowboys after this versus just feeling the same or worse?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Dak's at this point not going to let them lose. I mean, that's when you have that from your quarterback. I think that's a really great attribute to have. And it's funny. Like Micah Parsons, like to me, like that was amazing. I guess Seattle decided not to block him. I mean, they blocked him all night long, and then I think on that play, from what I had heard, that they had said, they were going to just let him go and just try to throw it over him, and just to have that kind of burst on the final play of the game, I thought was amazing. It's like you look at Micah's stats. Oh, no sacks, some pressures. Did he make a difference? Yeah, like at the end of the game, and then DaRon Bland. I don't even have any more words for DaRon Bland anymore. I don't even know.
What?
I don't have any more words for DaRon Bland. I mean, I don't know what to say.
Well, I assume all the words before were good, and I would assume today you would have a lot that's bad.
Yeah, I mean that's the point. I mean that's the point. Like he is a playmaking cornerback. He's not a shutdown corner at all. And they were going after him. He was giving up big plays in this game. I mean, before he was giving up some plays and wasn't that big a deal. I think in Washington there's some plays over the middle. These were big chunk plays. But it's funny because you keep testing him and he's going to make some plays as well. He dropped an interception at the end, which was probably a good thing. It was fourth down.
Yeah.
He needed that yards, but I mean, he gets that. I mean, he's sitting at 9 interceptions. I mean, I don't even think we're even talking about the Diggs, Everson, Walls record, really. I don't at 11, but I mean, he's at 8. He's flirting with it. It's just weird because he's given up some plays. He was. I don't know if he was a liability, but he was definitely. They were.
Oh, he was definitely a liability. Yeah, I mean, sure. he was being pantsed nationally on national TV. Is the DaRon Bland comparison to Trayvon Diggs from 2021 fair in terms of incredible ball skills, getting all the picks? It felt like Bland's coverage numbers. It feels like his coverage numbers for this year were better than some of those coverage numbers from Diggs from your PFFs and all those sites. Is that comparison fair, you think, right now, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. It does feel about the same. It feels, it's not. I mean, it's not Deion Sanders. I mean, it's not. I mean, but who is? Right. When I said that about shutdown corner, name another. Revis. I mean, they both wear gold. So I mean, I just don't know if that term exists anymore. But to answer your question, yeah, I do think it's very comparable where these guys are just making plays week after week, and it's not all perfect. It really isn't. I mean, they're nobody's sitting in the meeting rooms on the other teams and going, okay, can't throw it at 26. In fact, they're looking at it like, throw it at 26, because we'll make plays. I mean, Seattle is a tough matchup for those receivers. Those receivers, we talked about it all week.
Yep.
And I thought they played really well. I thought they did a good job. But their game plan was very good. Get the ball out quick. Mm-hmm. Not only did they get the ball out quick, but those guys were open. That was the amazing part, is that it wasn't just quick little pop passes here. I mean, they were getting it out quick, and they had guys running free. So I just thought it was a really great game for Seattle, and I thought the Cowboys figured out a way to answer. But, they didn't make him punt at all, but the last 3 possessions of the game, they got off the field. That's kind of that was really my point of the whole playoff thing, is that you figured out in the last 3 possessions, you got 3 stops. And you weren't stopping them all game long. And McCarthy was having to call the game a little bit differently, probably because of that. but it ended up working.
Nick Eatman joins us here, 105 through the Fan. Okay, so go to those McCarthy calls. Take us through which ones you liked, which ones you didn't like. You deciding to pass late in the game, not going for two, all that.
Yeah, for me, I hated the one at the end of the game just because I feel like you almost can cut the clock in half by running it. And if I can get 2 or 3 yards there, if I don't get the first,
go for it again.
I might consider going for it. They got no timeouts. You could put the game away with a yard or two, and if not, they got to drive it down there. So I would have done that. I hated that pass. That just shows the confidence they have in the play calling and Dak and things right now. But the one that's tricky is when you're down 8 in the third quarter like that, not going for two. I sat on the fence on that one. When it was 3 minutes to go, I'm like, I think I would have tried to tie the game. But I understand, because if you don't, you miss it. Now, if they go and score, which they did, now you're down 9. So it kept them sort of in the game, but I also would have kicked the field goal, I think, when they were down. They got the interception by Bland. I thought that was just a gift possession, so why not just take 3 points for it?
Would have been a 48-yarder.
Yeah, and here we are saying, just take the 3. I've been around long enough to know there's some kickers that there's no guarantee on anything. So just to say, hey, take the easy 3 on the 48. And he's getting close to that upright. I don't know if you guys are seeing that.
Oh, yeah, he is.
He's really flirting with that upright. But, he's steady. 4 more field goals for him. But I don't know. I mean, I kind of would. What were y'all's thoughts on that? I mean, Choppy, you're big on the analytics stuff too. The going for 2, not going for 2 right there. I don't know. I mean, I was really on the fence on that one.
I probably would have gone for 2. I didn't have a problem with the other ones. The interesting one after the Bland pick, they had scored on every possession prior to that, and they had gone 60 yards at least on every possession prior to that, and they only went 8 there. I think they just thought their offense was rolling, nothing could stop them. And if and that was not an easy drop. If CD, they converted, like CD just dropped it.
True.
And then both of these guys agreed with going for it on 3rd and 3. They just didn't like the pass. They didn't like the play call.
Yeah.
I'm more conservative. I'm a little more conservative with you, Nick. I'm back to leaning a little bit more towards taking the points. Like field goal before halftime. Now, I wasn't thinking that Seattle was going to blow up like that offensively. I thought the Cowboys were going to get more stops, but I was fine with getting a point, extra point versus the 2 point, and I would have considered running twice like you to evaporate the clock at the end.
And one more thing, and it's easier to say this after the Cowboys win and stuff like that. It's still one of the worst officiated games I've seen in a long, long time. And if you're going to throw it, throw it. Don't wait for them to about to break the huddle on the next play to throw it. The late calls. I thought the worst ones of the game were the ones that favored the Cowboys, honestly. It was so annoying. Everyone in the press box was just annoyed by it, and it's like, that's not pass interference, or that's not whatever. But they were consistently bad, in my opinion.
Nick, we've talked a lot about, who have the Cowboys played? Or that's been a big narrative, nationally, is that the Cowboys haven't played any quality opponents. This is probably the strongest opponent they've gotten a victory over to this point of the season. But was there anything about this game last night that gave you, outside of just the context of this particular game, was there anything about it that gave you pause for this gauntlet they're about to go through over the next 4 games? Like, hey, this is a real concern over these next 4 weeks.
Yeah, and it hasn't changed, Bobby. It's the fact that when you're going up against multiple teams with multiple weapons, especially in the passing game, more than 2, 3. Philadelphia's got 2 great wide receivers. One of them is one of the best in the league. But San Francisco's got, I don't even know if they're receivers or runners or they're both. I don't even know what they've got, but they've got a bunch over there. And it's tough. It's tough to cover them all. And the Diggs injury, even though Bland is playing like he's playing, I remember thinking way back then, when you're facing teams like this, do you have enough guys to match up with these weapons? And so that's the one that I think it's concerning to that point, because you are going to face teams that have multiple guys in the passing game that can hurt you. But I thought it was very similar to what Philly did with Buffalo. I think people think Buffalo's better than their record. I think Seattle looks better than that record. I mean, you are what you are. I get it. But it was that type of game where, you're at home, but you're still having to fight for your life here. And, and they figured out a way to do it. They figured out a way to win. So I thought it was a really good win. It wasn't the best team you're going to face, but it's the type of game that, like I said, is going to get you ready for the playoffs because Seattle was hitting them right in the mouth and the Cowboys were coming back. I thought Jake Ferguson was huge, not just the way he caught the ball, but the way he answered. Those guys were hitting him. I mean, when he walked up on number 6 or 2, whoever tried to hit him there, and he basically just said, "You're little. I'm going to walk over you and say first down." And then, of course, Jamal Adams, which I roll on him, but anyway, it was a great game because we've seen the Cowboys lose those type of games, and they looked like they were going to. And they found a way. And number 4 is just playing out of his mind. He's just unbelievable right now.
Nick, let me throw out a possible excuse for the defense because you've covered this stretch of games for 20 years. Do you think that fatigue could have kicked in here, third game in 13 days for both teams? In your experience covering the Cowboys in these stretches, is that a factor or they're used to it?
I think that if it is, then it's a factor for Seattle as well because they did it right, and they gave up a lot of points too. So yeah, I mean, if you're going to say that, I think that's fair because both teams couldn't force the other one to punt ever. So yeah, I mean, it's a legitimate excuse, and it would be a good one for both sides. But I just think the Cowboys are having a hard time matching up with receivers like that. I mean, Seattle there's not many teams that have multiple receivers like that over 400 yards. Now they're probably a lot of them over 500 yards. And it's hard. It's hard to do that. I mean, this rookie, Jackson Smith and Jigba, I mean, he's going to be really, really good. He had a couple of really nice plays in the game. So I just don't know if the Cowboys have enough corners, secondary depth to match teams like that. That's what's scary about going up against Philly and the 49ers.
Fantastic as always. Enjoy your day and your weekend. Nick Eatman, thank you.
All right, thank you.
And it's December, so that means you can start putting your lights up and your Christmas decorations.
Oh, we will get to that at 12:20.
Cowboys put their lights up. They lit up Seattle. You get it? Do you get the correlation thing I did there?
I heard it, Mike. You didn't have to explain that one, actually. Yeah,
I think that's how you have to do it for a Marconi, though. I think you have to explain.
Woo!
No, that was a fun game last night. It was an entertaining, fun game.
So what I'm curious about from the people this morning, I want to know the vibe, is are you more pumped about this Cowboys win or worried about what's happened to the defense?
I'm more pumped about the win.
Okay, let's
go. Because you needed that. Yeah. The Cowboys defense is something that they definitely need to clean up, and I'll definitely ask Jerry here in a little bit because there were 3 major meltdowns in that game from that defense. 3 major meltdowns, and I'm not even counting the 73-yard touchdown to open the game for the Seahawks. I'm talking
counting
about
when they scored touchdowns on 3 straight plays.
Yeah,
and then there was a whole bunch of things.
Yeah, that was a little awkward too with all those flags. But I'm counting the drive that they got before they got the drive to go into halftime, and then right out of halftime they had 2 big time meltdowns there, and then another one shortly.
They scored like 6 touchdowns, but only 1 counted. Luckily at the end of the half, I was like, how many times they actually scored a touchdown a whole bunch of times? But
what I want to highlight the most though is Ferguson. That dude's attitude all game long was, "You're not getting after me." There was a series, Kevin, where he had 3 straight plays where he was going back and forth with Frank Clark, and Frank Clark was doing everything he could to get into his head, and Ferg was like, "No, dude, I'm here tonight, and you better be ready to deal with me." He was the man last night.
Well, I hear what you're saying, and I'm thinking of this as it was an individual game, and maybe I'm wrong about this. I'm happy they won, but it was – am I worried about the defense? Well, I guess so a little bit, but it was an individual game. If you watch the Seahawks play Thursday night on Thanksgiving, you'd say their offense is horrible without cussing, okay? But then their offense was great yesterday. It was an individual game. Does that mean Seattle's offense is now great? No. Does it mean they're probably as bad as that San Francisco game? Probably not. Maybe it's just a matchup situation.
Did they learn something from the San Francisco game, or did they just see we can expose DaRon Bland all night?
I just think that, that happened. I just think that it was an individual game. The Cowboys came out on top. Yes, there are things to be excited about. There's things to be worried about in the future, but it doesn't mean the Cowboys are going to play bad defense the rest of the way. Maybe they will, but I don't think that game is like, oh, the defense is bad.
There were moments, Kevin, I think it was 28-20 was when I said, and there's another series where the defense looks completely overmatched and out-energied. And out-energied is not a real word, okay? But they looked like they didn't. They look like they didn't have that level, that next place to go to. But then they did it late in the game whenever it was time to make those plays, to make the big stops. They had those. And I don't know if it's because they were not having the energy earlier or if it was Dak coming over to the defense and saying, y'all need to wake the F up because it's time and we need y'all right now. We've been doing our part. And they did. They did their part to get back in it offensively, get up on it, and then they said, all right, defense, you need to make your plays late.
And I will say the defense did step up late, right? They stopped them on 4th down, and then they stopped them to win the game. It was the most crazy press conference thing that I heard, and I think Geno Smith was telling the truth. They intentionally wanted Micah Parsons to not be touched, and within 1 second be in Geno Smith's face. And they needed the running back, Dallas, at that point, right?
Yeah.
They needed him to line up on the left-hand side of Geno for a right-sided screen play. So they needed him to get across Micah, unblocked, do not touch him, and then get across that, get open for a lane to pass to, and hope that all the Cowboys also rush the passer tremendously.
Which I know it didn't work, but
Micah's going to get there in 1 second.
But at least I understand and I appreciate that they laid out what they were trying to do. I know it didn't work, but at least I did like that they gave us their thought process behind. Here's what we were trying to accomplish.
It's really stupid. It's like me throwing the ball down the middle to Barry. It's like, yeah, man, I think that down the middle is going to be the thing he least expects at this time.
And then what did he do?
He hit a home run.
Yeah, that was what happened.
I don't get – I mean, it's great. I love this. I love it for the Cowboys. I don't get how maybe the fastest human being literally to ever play football, to ever play – faster than Lawrence Taylor, faster than anybody I've ever seen get to the quarterback unblocked is Micah Parsons, and they're like, Geno will have enough time to get this ball to Dallas, find the lane, and all the Cowboys within 1 second will also be as fast as Micah Parsons and get up the field. So because I don't think it would have worked because – Micah got there so fast that the other defensive linemen couldn't really do much.
You've heard this for the last 2 years now, quarterbacks saying that they underestimate Micah's speed, that they don't realize how fast he is until he's in their face, and they're like, whoa, hold on.
You
what
feel like that
happened
would
there?
stop happening.
At some point you feel like it would, but I think you just kind of have to like test it to be like to really see it. And it's like, you know, that kid that's just walking around going, what happens if I push this button? And then you find out what happens. And that's what happened last night. And yeah, they were hoping that Micah, whenever he's running there, that he would kind of stutter just a second on the running back a little bit and kind of peel back off on him. But then instead what happens, Micah says, no, I'm coming. My job is to come hit you. And then it forces the ball out of his hands. So I don't know that, like, based on the numbers last night, that Micah Parsons, it changed anything for his Defensive Player of the Year award, like potential, because he didn't have any sacks, right? But he had lots of pressures, and he impacted the game last night, just like he's supposed to, man. So I thought it was a lot of fun. There were moments last night where I was like, I don't know if I can handle this season anymore. And then, you know, the Cowboys make a few plays that I'm pretty proud of. They had a couple of drives where they finally had attitude offensively. And I was like, okay, there it is. Tony Pollard with a big boy run right there. Jake Ferguson deserving. Because when Dak Prescott runs over to the sideline and he's starting to get jawed at by, was it Witherspoon or was it Tariq Woolen, and they're all up in his face, I was like, what should happen right after that? Your quarterback just put his shoulder into somebody, which he hasn't been doing lately, and the entire team sees everybody. Now, they did have to call a timeout. And why did they have to call a timeout? Because Dak's over there jawing with somebody, and then he wastes 3 or 4 seconds or something like that.
I thought that was going to kill them when they had to use that timeout. Just because of where you were at the game, I was like, oh, my God, you're going to come to this point where you're going to wish you had that timeout
back.
But
they needed that attitude. They needed to let the Seahawks know. And then who gets the touchdown on that play? It's Ferguson, who deserved that for what he'd put in throughout the night.
Do you think when Dak was in that dude's face, he was like, what are you going to do? I'm a quarterback. You can't do nothing, man. You can't lay a finger on me.
Yeah,
I could push you to the ground right now. They throw a parade for me.
They'll throw a flag on you.
You can't do nothing to me right now. And this is one of the things I don't always agree with, like, obviously Micah has been outspoken about it this year, is the double standard coverage on the Cowboys. I don't always agree with that. This is a scenario where I believe I will, because I've already seen a lot of pushback, so I'm glad this is where y'all are at about, oh, they barely beat blah, 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 blah. But when Philly gets smoked defensively against Washington twice and barely holds on both times, wow. They did it again.
Yeah,
and so that is
the most important part.
That is one part of the double standard that I think might be in play here. And when people are like, they finally beat a team with a winning record, I'm going to be like, hey, don't forget about week 2 against the Jets.
Yeah.
And
now they get an extra few days to rest before
they
go
Philly
play Philly.
game.
So this is a positive thing to come off the win and still have a plan and get your guys some rest as you're moving along here.
And they're 9-3.
Mm-hmm.
That
is pretty good.
They're 9-3, and they won the 4 games that everyone's like, well, you need to win these next 4 games. All right, well, they did.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you go into Philly, and let's see what you got.
Look,
that'll tell us a lot.
And they locked up the 5 seed at worst. That's what they did yesterday.
Agreed.
So now you don't have to worry about falling to 6 or 7. You're in the playoffs, and worst case scenario, you're the number 1 wild card team. That being said, I know that they would like to win out and have hopefully some tiebreaker situations or whatever go their way and be the 1 or 2 seed. Because if they win out, I think there's a good chance they would be the 1 seed. So I'm happy with the win. I know we got to go here to break, but I'm happy with the win. It was a fun game to watch. Are there concerning things on the Cowboys? Yes. Do I think it's the death of the Cowboys because they gave up 35 points? It's an individual game. To me, it doesn't mean this was one game. When was it? 42? I guess the Philadelphia game. They gave up a lot of points against Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe they will. Maybe the next 4 games they average giving up 35 points. But I don't think so.
They have some things to work on, but they have a lot of good things to build on.
Good afternoon, Nick. How the heck are you?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you doing, fellas?
Doing great. Did the Cowboys prove anything new to you last night?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was a lot of things to take away positively. We had talked about all season about how these guys haven't played a game like they did last night, having that knockdown, drag out, back and forth type of high scoring affair, and they were able to come out on the other side and win that game. I was talking about it this morning, and it kind of dawned on me. This is a type of game that we felt like throughout the course of the last 5, 6, 7 years, even going back before Mike McCarthy when Jason Garrett was still around. Last night was a type of game that the Cowboys typically lose. The Seahawks taking control in the second half and having an 8-point lead in the fourth quarter, and the Cowboys having to claw back into it, and then on the final drive still having to stand tall and force a stop. And they were able to do all of those things. I think it gave a lot of confidence to those guys. Even if the Seahawks are now back at 500 at 6-6, and you could play the comparison game looking to how they played last week against the 49ers. But I think all in all, there's a lot of positivity you could take away from a win like that.
Nick, Dak Prescott was brilliant, and the offense was fantastic yet again. What stood out to you from Dak and the offense's performance? And we've talked about this with the bye week changes that they made. I mean, do you have any insight being in that building? Who went up to who and said, this isn't working? Because since the bye week, this offense has been crazy.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have any insight as to, who stood up in the meetings other than CeeDee Lamb coming out after the 49ers game. I think that's probably the bigger pinpoint I can point to as far as an individual. But for me, coming out of the bye week, what's been the biggest thing is the integration of motion. And, you didn't see a lot of that going into the bye week out of Mike McCarthy's offense. I believe at that time they were using motion at a bottom 5 pace in the entire league. And last night used it on 72.9% of plays. I mean, it's unreal how often that they're getting guys moving before the snap. And what does that do? It allows the offense to identify coverages pre-snap, and especially with the heavy zone scheme that Seattle runs, and how efficient they've been able to play with that scheme throughout the course of the last couple of years with their really young and physical pieces. It really helped Dak Prescott succeed last night. And, typically he's not as efficient as he was last night against those heavy zone schemes. And it allowed him to be able to work a little bit more freely. And I think the thing, though, that's impressed me the most over the course of the last 6 weeks has been Dak's mobility. And not only him using his legs and picking up yardage and, fighting and being physical in that way, but being mobile and getting outside of the pocket, extending plays, allowing his receivers to be able to extend plays with him as well. There's a lot of chemistry being built on that side of the ball. I think it's going to be really interesting to run it back against Philadelphia here in 10 days and see the improvements in that area and how it's helped this offense overall.
Nick, I got a two-part question for you here. The first part of the question is about the secondary last night and how that went for them. In the way of, were you surprised, or were you expecting Seattle with that wide receiver package they have to get a little traction maybe in that game? And my second part of the question is, what's the vacation place you always push that we need to go to? I hear you doing commercials for this vacation place, and you do it quite well. What's the place that we need to go to in the vacation area? What's that place?
Yeah, I'll start with the second one. It's Port Aransas.
There you go.
Get down to the PA.
They got to get to the PA. I appreciate you pushing the PA, and then tell me about the Cowboys secondary.
I'll tell you about PA. It's one of the better spots on the Texas coast. So if Mike McCarthy wants to learn something about the Texas coast, it's not a bad spot to go to. But
there we go.
As far as your first question, it's a little bit of both, in my opinion, at least coming out of it. I was surprised that the Cowboys secondary had an outing like they had last night, but also at the same time, it makes sense when you look at the guys that are on the other side of the ball. You know, you look at DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, the rookie and Jackson Smith-Njigba being able to come home to Dallas. You know, he was playing with a little bit more fire. You could see it from the very first drive. So when you take all that into account, it's not necessarily surprising that it was that group that did it. It was just more so in the fashion that it happened. And DaRon Bland really getting picked on, having easily his worst game of the season. You can make the case his worst game of his career, but still ended up with an interception at the end of the day and had a great play to be able to break on that ball on that out route to Tyler Lockett. But I want to talk about DaRon Bland specifically here for a moment. You know, there's one of two things that can happen here down the stretch from this moment. One, he's going to continue to get picked on after that game last night because of, how DK Metcalf was able to get open, how Tyler Lockett got super open on that play where he just missed Geno Smith putting it right on his face, which very well could have put that game in a much more precarious situation. One of two things can happen. He can bounce back from this, and teams will continue to be able to throw at him, and he's going to end up with some gaudy interception numbers on the other side. Or, maybe he won't be able to correct those things off film, and they continue to throw at him, and maybe it's more of like a situation where we saw when Trayvon Diggs back in 2021 when he had those 11 picks, but he was still giving up big plays at the end of the day. You hope it's not the latter, and there's still advantages to the latter, but if he's able to correct those things, then that's going to be a really impressive stretch here for DaRon Bland coming up.
After the pick against Carolina and then the one that he took away last night, I think I'd be terrified if I didn't have perfect ball placement as a quarterback. I would try to go other spots. I'm willing to go to Bland if we can't get anything else going as far as attacking him. But if you're an opposing OC, how would you look at it right now if you're coming into the next game against DaRon Bland?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I'm looking at his ball skills for sure, and I'm treating him like a receiver. So I'm trying to put the ball in a place where he can't even put a fingernail on it because he's shown that he can extend out there, make even a somersault like he did against Carolina and bring it in. And even the pick last night, I mean, he just broke on it on the perfect placement, perfect timing, and he was able to get it. It wasn't necessarily a bad throw from Geno Smith. Could have been put a little bit further out, absolutely, but that's just a really good play by DaRon Bland. If I'm an OC, I'm making sure my receivers are understanding that you have to be physical with him as soon as the ball is snapped. You got to put a hand on him and get him away from you, because the more separation that you have on Bland, the better opportunities that you're going to have to be able to haul in a reception. And I think that's what we were able to see from DK Metcalf. Well, obviously one of the more physical receivers in the entire NFL. He was putting hands on him as soon as the ball was snapped off his release. And then as the route was happening, there was a lot of hands going on. I mean, you can look at the penalties and see that, but he was putting hands on him, and he was creating that little bit of separation that you need against the DB that has the ball skills like him.
Staying with the secondary, Nick Harris, DallasCowboys.com with us here in the G-Bag Nation. What do you think's going on with the safeties right now? That was such a position group we were excited about. I know Kurtz was battling some injuries. Donovan Wilson, I don't know what you saw on that play on the DK Metcalf touchdown. Looked like he was a little over-aggressive there. What stood out to you about the safety group?
Yeah, I think the safety unit for sure had probably its worst outing of the season last night. And you look at what they were trying to do early on, and there were a couple of safeties that were lined up and man coverage at times with guys in the slot. It just didn't really make sense. And then whenever they wanted to back up and kind of readjust and use more of their zone methods that they do with that single high safety, whenever they throw Malik Hooker up top and, try to integrate Jaron Kearse in some of those same instances, it just confused everything. I think they really need just kind of a getting back to the drawing board type of moment. I think the biggest thing that stood out to me or the biggest negative play that stood out to me from the safety group yesterday was a DK Metcalf, his third touchdown in the red zone from Geno Smith, and Jaron Kearse ran straight into Stephon Gilmore, and Gilmore had good coverage on Metcalf, would have been able to try to make a play, and you could even see Gilmore really frustrated at the end of that play, and that's not a guy that shows a ton of emotion. So that was the biggest thing that stood out to me from the safety group. Definitely need to see Jaron Kearse take another step over the course of the next few weeks, but I think that trickles down to Donovan Wilson and Malik Hooker as well. Typically you're seeing those guys, they're able to make impact plays in the running game at times too. Didn't even really see that last night. Whenever Zach Charbonnet was able to get into that third level, he was able to kind of break away on a couple of occasions. So, yeah, I would love to see that safety group improve. That's going to be necessary against Philly next week.
Nick, whatever you did in that building to get Brandon Cooks involved, I appreciate you doing that. Because
yeah, absolutely. I got to take one for the team sometimes, right?
Absolutely. But, CeeDee Lamb is playing so well, but, man, the Archer is getting after it in these routes, the way he's able to separate the ball, the catches the big catches he's able to make. Have you noticed that yourself as someone that studies these games?
Yeah, absolutely. You see the separation that he's been able to create. That's been the biggest thing for sure, Brian. It's that veteran savviness that he's been able to just kind of tap into over the course of the last few weeks. And he's run a lot. He's run a much more developed route package over the course of the last 3 or 4 weeks too. When you look at early in the season, what they were asking him to do, it's much different than what's happening now. He's got much more integration in the short to intermediate game. They're working him in downfield and trying to get those opportunities downfield. I still feel like they really haven't tapped into that full potential of what he can do downfield, other than what we saw against the Rams when he had 173 yards and a couple of actions down the seams. But you're going to continue to see Brandon Cooks add a different layer to his game that you maybe quite haven't seen throughout the season. And it's building with chemistry with Dak Prescott. And as Dak Prescott builds the chemistry with Cooks, he's been building it with Jake Ferguson, even Kavontae Turpin, and it's just continuing with CeeDee Lamb as well. And when that happens, it just allows an opposing defense to make it really difficult to cover these type of guys. And especially when Lamb has a night like he had last night, it's only going to open things up for Brandon Cooks as the season goes on.
How many points do you think they average the rest of the way? It just seems like the 40 is going to happen, as long as it's not the Niners, Nick, and they're not on the schedule as far as I know the rest of the way.
Yeah, absolutely. This offense, it's keeping at a historic pace right now. It's looking really strong, and it's wild to think after whatever I looked up coming out of Week 4 against the Niners, and just had so many questions about this offensive system and even the personnel involved. It's done a complete 180 in my mind, it's really impressive. When you look at the Eagles next week, there's a really good opportunity to put a lot of points on the board. You think back to when they were at Lincoln Financial Field 5 weeks ago, they left a lot of points on the board. So they left a lot of points off the board, rather. There's going to be an opportunity to put up an offensive production like they did last night next week and throughout the course of the season. You look at Buffalo and Miami, they have definitely looked susceptible on the defensive side of the ball in the last few weeks, as well as Detroit, and then we've seen what they've already can do to Washington. So I think if they could just keep this pace, man, it's going to be pretty fun to watch.
What do you expect when San Francisco and Philly line up this weekend?
I expect brute physicality. I think it's going to be a knockdown, drag-out type of game. That game's going to be won in the trenches. I really respect the skill players on both sides of the ball for both teams, but I think whoever wins up front is going to end up winning that game. I think it's going to be a 24-20 type of outing. And I took the Niners this morning when I was asked, but I don't feel great about it. It was on a coin toss. So I guess I'll stick with the Niners, but I think it could go either way.
How good's Jake Ferguson?
Ooh.
Say that one more time.
How good's Jake Ferguson for you right now as far as full tight end, complete tight end? What are we looking at here with this guy?
Whenever I think about Jake Ferguson, what he's been able to put together this season, I think back to Oxnard, and whenever I arrived, and no one had any concerns about him taking over as a tight end one. You were looking at, you heard things about, hey, can Tony Pollard take over as an RB1 and really be this guy? And obviously the kicker situation was like, hey, can these kickers be these guys? And can Tyron Smith still be this strong LT1? But you never heard concerns about Jake Ferguson. And I think that speaks a lot of volumes to the trust that he's earned in that building. And it's starting to pay off on the field now. And you see whenever he's able to get that on-field production, the people that are backing him up, whenever he's jawing with Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs, Tyler Biotis, and the guys that are backing him up on those type of instances, he's a true locker room guy. He's emerged as a solidified, cemented tight end one on this team for years to come, in my opinion. He's showing his physicality. He's showing his receiving ability. He's taken such a huge leap in his blocking department this season as well. He's really put it together. If I had to pick one guy that's taken that second-year leap on the offensive side of the ball that I love every time I see, it's Jake Ferguson. It's tough to say maybe the best second-year leap because Tyler Smith has been phenomenal as well, but that 2022 draft class, we're going to look back on that one here in a couple of years.
They get out of this thing healthy again?
I'm going to go ahead and say yes, so hopefully so. As far as we know, everything is looking good. There are no major injury concerns, and that's actually something I was thinking about this morning. Mm-hmm. They're going to have to figure out some room for Peyton Hendershot, and I think whenever they opened up his practice window 21 days ago, they were expecting maybe to have an injury slot open to be able to fit in a guy to put on the 53, but it's not the case, and that's a great problem to have.
Nick, I know Brian and I were talking about this in the post-game show, but what did you think of some of the coaching decisions from Mike McCarthy? The decision there to pass to CeeDee Lamb instead of just running the ball, keep it going. I mean, clearly, look, you won, it paid off, and Coach has been aggressive all year, so he's maintaining that consistency. But I wonder what your thoughts on some of those gambles were.
Yeah, if the Seahawks go down the field and score a touchdown on that final drive, that's exactly what we're talking about today ad nauseum. You had an opportunity to take 40 seconds off the clock right there with 1:43 to go, I believe it was. You run the ball there. I understand that Dak and CeeDee had such a great day, and you had an opportunity to put the dagger in it, but you put trust in Tony Pollard there to be able to at least pick up a few yards, if not all four, and go ahead and get you the first down. And if he doesn't, then you take 40 seconds off the clock. You're able to run it down, take a timeout. Seahawks had 0 timeouts at that point. It was one of the worst decisions I've seen this season, honestly. But as you said, it didn't hurt them in the end. They ended up pulling out with a victory. I've seen a couple of moments, I think, late game management this season that I've just kind of questioned Mike McCarthy on, but it hasn't been him too bad just yet. But I think that's something to keep in mind whenever these late game situations arise down the stretch.
Nick Harris, DallasCowboys.com. Great interview as always. I enjoyed it, but Clete Blakeman is telling me you had a personal foul back there about 4 minutes ago.
What happened?
I don't know. I'm pretty sure he's making it up.
Oh, I got you. I was thinking in my head, like, Clete Blackman, that name sounds really familiar. Why? It's because I heard him talk for 45 minutes last night.
No doubt, dude.
I'll meet him down in Port Aransas for the mini buy.
There you go.
We can talk about it.
Dude, have a great time. Have an amazing weekend. We'll catch up with you soon.
Have a good one, fellas.